It is 5 o'clock on Monday, June the 27th. The Bastrop EDC Board reserves the right to convene into executive session at any time during the meeting regarding any agenda item in compliance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Chapter 551, Government Code. We'll start with, do we have any public comments today? No? Okay, very good. Then we're going to go right into any comment? Oh, okay. We're going to go right into the budget workshop then, 3.1. The Bastrop EDC Board will meet in a budget workshop session to review and discuss all matters related to the EDC's draft budget for fiscal year 2022-2023, including discussion and possible action on education and workforce development programs, infrastructure projects, and proposed capital improvement projects, which can legally be funded by Type B sales tax. Bill?
Okay. What I'd like to begin with is a wrap-up of where we were last meeting, where we had gone through the presentation, captured the input. From what we did from that is working within the city's budgeting software, and a lot of help with Tracy there at the end was getting the things put in. So what we'll begin with today is we'll actually work from the printout from the city's process. So if we can pass that around. So what this is now is this is our budget loaded into the city system. All in all, most things are in there. When we get to changes or deltas that have happened, I'll point them out. I put notes on it where they do happen. But when we look at the first page, revenue by source, this matches exactly where we were before at 4.2 million. This is including the taxes, revenue, lease agreement that we have, as well as other interest and investment income. So the total reaches the 4.2 million at the bottom of the screen. So no different from what we presented the last meeting. Okay. When we go to the next page, again, we've got most things loaded. If we start at the first line where it says personnel cost, we were able to get the 7 positions loaded in at 600, and we said it's about 625. Angela got close; she was off by $17, but I think that's going to be okay. What didn't get loaded in is all of the benefits, and for that 7th person working with HR and backfeed, and that's more of a timing issue of getting this for this report. So what we see is if we go to the 1, 2, 3, 4th column over to the right, or the second from the left, what you see is 809 or 810,000. That's missing about $40,000 worth of benefits that need to go in for the 7th position and some of the other positions that haven't been filled. So there wasn't a basis for it. So that's still work to be done with Angela and HR, and then backfeed into Tracy. So that really would be at 850. So that's how we were able to get that done. The rest of the information in here is loaded as we had discussed in the meeting. When you reach the bottom line, it's called City Projects and Programs, 257,000. You would not have seen 257,000, but what you would have seen is 50,000 for the sports study, 164,000 for downtown lighting, and the 43,000 for the 1% of Agnes Street. So those 3 combined reach the 257. Okay. If we move over to the next page, sorry, I got to move over to the next page. We reach the second line down. It says BIP Technology MLK Infrastructure. That is the cost for the fiber optic in the business park as an operating expense. Before it showed up under capital projects, we said, well, let's see if we can get this moved. It is moved in the operational, so that's why it shows up here at 82,560. So that shows the benefit of the negotiated lower price that the EDC staff achieved, and shows up in operating now. When we go down, I'd say 2/3, 3/4 of the way down, you see a line called 350. Well, that's useless. Sorry. 380 agreement reimbursement. We said that was going to be 433,720, and that was going to be completed this year. Tracy has sent us information saying the latest calculation says it will go over into next year by an estimated 15,000. And so this 15,000 that shows up in the second from right column, I said is new per Tracy's email of 625. Not a significant change. Okay. And if we move to the next page has the things in there that we talked about. The main items on this page are the two $2 million line items that are in there. This was the BIP technology MLK infrastructure. This was the connection for MLK, which was 1.57. We said, let's go ahead and increase that to $2 million. The other part we talked about was technology drive, which is really the start of the build-out of the south section, as well as a Jackson Street drive, which was the extension built for MoCA discussion, which was $1 million. So that's $1 million each, or $2 million total. Just as an additional comment, we did get the estimate from Doucette based on their layout of the lower property, and that's over $13 million to complete. That's not what we talked about, 5 million, let's double it, let's go to 5 million. That's really at about 13 million. So when we start that one's going to be quite a bit bigger than what was originally projected, mainly because of, from my point of view, a lot of retention ponds all over the place, which I think we could do a better job of sitting with Doucette and re-looking at it and see how to consolidate that.
So are we going to get an update on that on one of these upcoming meetings as far as why it went from where we thought it was up to 13 million?
Well, where we thought it was just pulling out of thin air. What we're getting is the first results of what Doucette achieved in their study. So we're just seeing the first version of that. So we would expect that we would do an update with Doucette at a future meeting. Okay. Okay.
And also on that lower part, we think of the best way to phrase this, and Gene, you might be able to help answer. Do we have any potential projects that would, or any likelihood that a potential project would greatly increase or decrease the amount of street we may need?
We definitely, can you guys hear that, or nope? Okay. We do continue to have lots of conversations on both sides of that. We do have some smaller projects that are, kind of waiting for us to get to that phase of being able to carve out some of those smaller lots that you guys had originally kind of, laid out. And then we do continue to have conversations with, brokers and companies that are interested in coming this direction, that are all the way up to 40 and 50 acre potential projects, but nothing that is obviously at a point of bringing to you all as an option. So lots of knocks on the door.
And again, so that would be part of what we would continue to do as part of the build out of the Bastrop Industrial Park, was to make that shovel ready for the assets that we have. So I think the next step really on that is not necessarily change where we are right now. $1 million is kind of what we said to start. We said before it'd be 4 million the next year. Well, it may be 4 million the next year and the next year and the next year to manage that out, depending on how we want to manage our funds. So overall, in summary, when you look at the difference between the 4.2 of revenue and the bottom number is actually, it says 6,882. That's really more, you got to add 40,000 into that for the benefits. That's really going to be 6,923, so essentially 7 million. So we got 4.2 million coming in and 7 million going out this year in this budget, with 4 million of that being the two big buckets for the infrastructure there for the industrial park. Without that, if you just take that 4 million off, you're back to 7.9 million, sorry, 7 million becomes 3 million if you take the major investment projects out. And that means that your delta is really 1.2 million of available cash flow in the year for capital projects, without dipping into invested assets, the 8 million that we have, and or any other financing that we may choose to do to develop. Okay. Again, as a reminder, we've got about 2 million of reserve that we need to maintain. That 2 million of reserve is about 1.4 million related to the agreements we have, performance agreements with those that have purchased property already. And the reserve of 90 days, I think the city uses the 3-month reserve. Based on operating expenses, that would be about another 600 and change. So that's how we get to the 2 million of reserve that we would be ready or obligated, the money being an obligation to be ready to return back when the companies reach their performance. Okay? So all in all, I think we were able to capture the target items we had in the meeting, and we're able to get it into the budget. Small deltas and small things missing, but all in all, I think we've been able to get it into the system and fed the baby so it's able to spit out the right report, so to speak. So any questions on the overall getting this budget loaded in for right now that anybody sees? We'll talk about projects. That's why we got Trey here as well. But any comments or anything? No?
I have a question on the contractual services for the FY23.
Mm-hmm.
Is the assumption that Jorgensen will all be paid in '22?
Yes, the Jorgensens were to be paid as much as possible, is what we said, as much as we can get paid.
I didn't know what you had, but if you had anything budgeted for '23 for them, that's really what I'm asking.
No,
So your assumption is that
we're going to get it all forced through.
And same with Mr. Weathers, or no?
No, 2 months of Mr. Weathers remains in the budget for next year.
Okay, thank you.
And all of the prior director, Janors, was in contractual, and now that's going to be 100% in the personnel. Okay. Ron, you had a question?
No, not so much a question as you had here for 7 folks. That may change, obviously, when we get a new CEO in, where it could be either more or less, just so we understand. I mean, so I think it's a great budget placeholder right now, but obviously there's a few things that have a potential for changing on these.
Okay. So with that, I think the second part of the discussion that we were going to have for this meeting is really taking a look at what the city projects were being looked at and considered. So with Trey, to be able to go through each of those, I think, give us a little more idea of what they are, and we can have some discussion about each one. Do we include, not include, how to include, from the BEDC board point of view? Okay. I'll send you over the baton.
I think Tracy and I are going to tag team this too, but yeah, let me go through the projects real quick. And I think you're familiar with some of them. We talked a little bit about these back in July. There were some fronting opportunities. July 12th of last year. Not close enough? Sorry, is that better? Ooh, okay. So I just want to start with kind of where our budget meeting left off with City Council back in March of, I think it was March 12th of this year. Kind of some of the policy direction and where we put together this capital plan and how we started. Again, really some of the basics that we're going to talk about, I think, accomplishes several of the goals on here for some of the priorities. That's to have a connected and diverse neighborhoods, a thriving commercial corridor, and then a comfortable and thriving downtown. Some of the leadership roles that were part of that policy was to maximize the business and industrial park, promotion of film and media, and workforce development. Again, some of the funding roles that were discussed were the Main Street program, infrastructure that enhances economic development, and identified quality of life projects that are in the capital improvement plan. We'll start with the transportation projects. And I have some maps in here, which I think is what we lacked last time, so I think this will help. And again, some of these are just proposed alignments, so they'll probably move slightly. And again, just like we talked about a moment ago, these numbers are what we believe will be the project budget. But again, this is still moving a little bit because our actually capital plan will change. Just adding some of the changes I see here in your budget tonight. But overall, $6 million with an issuance, sorry, with $1 million in 2023 for the Blakey Street extension. We know we have some more business coming in here. We expect a lot more traffic associated with this business. And here's kind of what that Blakey Street extension may look like. And we say Blakey, it's actually quite larger than Blakey, but this is an unnamed road to be decided at a later date. But essentially, providing better connectivity all the way across town, a little another east and west connector, if you will. Sure. So this is, yeah, so here's Lowe's. Here's the settlement. This is recently what I just showed you. This is Burleson Crossing East, which is coming in for their second reading tomorrow night for zoning. And then this is the Blakey extension. This is the middle school, right? And this is the car wash. Sorry. No, sorry, I look at these maps all the time, so I know exactly where I'm at when I pull it up.
So is that a two-lane connecting road, or there'll be, with the school and the turnout and getting into these areas, is this effectively, 3 lanes or more than 2 lanes because of what we experience with these schools and the backup in traffic patterns it creates?
So for this particular instance here, I could see it being 2 lanes with a partial turn lane from time to time. Right. Kind of match the existing cross-section. It's not, but that's just this is actually an exhibit left over from an application for a hazardous mitigation grant that we applied for that didn't get funded. So this is just an idea to give you, the alignment could change slightly. That is the boot company, that's right.
So there's development on the left one, but the right open field, is there a established development project for that?
There are some early discussions happening there, and it's actively being marketed.
It's being marketed, but there's no concrete project for that?
No.
Okay.
It's like Gene saying, lots of people knocking on the
Sure.
And prior, it wasn't for sale.
Yeah.
It's very much
All right. The other question that I have is, when we take a look at we talk about Lover's Lane and all of that in the class,
Yep.
When you look at where that road is going to enter and dump right into that turn by Dunkin' Donuts, that's a disaster today. How is this project going to mitigate that disaster?
So I've had some very, very preliminary conversations with the engineer, and with TxDOT engineer, also one of our capital engineers with Kimley Horn. We've talked about an alignment. We're aware of that situation. Some of it will be the intersections the actual on-ramp onto the feeder road could move slightly, right? Just to make sure that it makes sense. Again, there's going to be some alignment that we need to work through here with TxDOT.
Because that turn right there can be 40 cars long.
It can be.
Multiple times through the.
It can be.
We're starting to cut across the 120 cars long back at the only intersection
Yeah, but at least has light.
Right. What we do know is that this project will probably take 30 or 40% of the traffic that's going here to Burleson off the Peter Road anyway.
Okay. And then what would be the cost of development based on active projects now, just to get to from the Lowe's Road to go to the circle? I assume that circle is going to connect through
Yes.
settlement?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what would be the cost to connect to that first, and then when something real develops on the hayfield, the goat field has development,
Sure.
but by the time the hayfield on the right becomes, then be able to look at that.
So the comment on that and what council discussed, it's a philosophical conversation, because you either build it after the development comes, or you put the road in place so that, because the transportation connectivity is in place, and then when the development comes, they pay their proportionate share to a road that already exists, and they have shovel-ready projects. So your question of, well, you're only going to build that first part, what's proposed is you build the whole thing so that there's a transportation benefit to, and you've created economic development, you've created shovel-ready, and you're able to, roads to nowhere don't really do a whole lot of good.
As we go through here, the last project I think you'll see for transportation is that impact fee analysis for all of these projects, right, including the system overall, so that we can recapture those funds.
Now, my question was really along limited resources, that when you're looking at making shovel-ready the industrial park and making shovel-ready this and making shovel-ready, there's a limited amount of resources.
Sure.
So wondering what can be done to facilitate known projects and be able to take a look at, again, down the road where things can be delayed or pushed out depending on what financing and what assets are available to use. Okay.
Yeah, agreed. And maybe it makes sense, like you said, to have a portion of this done over time or as projects are active.
And the reality on that, if you go back to the map, if you go back to the map, the reality is, to your point, just like in the industrial park, somebody could come in and say they don't want it on the far east of the property, they want it down the very middle, right? This is still just, it's just lines on a piece of paper. It's not acquired right away.
Jein, being German, yes and no. Once you start committing to building the road, you're building the road. And so that's what we're looking at. Once you start committing next year to building the road, you got to know what we're building. So if we think we don't know quite what's going to happen in that, then I really wouldn't want to be building out that Far East Road.
No, we're not saying the same thing. Or I'm not being clear. The point is, just like in the industrial park, you don't know if one of those knocks turns into a real deal this month or next month, and that's why in this particular project, it's a little bit of money in fiscal year 23 and a hunk of money in fiscal year 24, because you are developing those design plans. Then you know more, every month you know more than you knew the month before. Certainly to the point of when you start acquiring right away, now you're committed to where that road's going to go and you have to price it out. But there's a lot of moving parts right now. That was my point.
So is there a risk that if we move ahead with this, that we could build that road out and then find out that that development is a residential project?
That's not the future land use for that project. They would have to come in for a zoning change.
Like the other side?
Correct. It's actually P2 at the moment, but we do believe that it'll be majority commercial. Maybe some multifamily in the rear.
Just to clarify, what is the current zoning on that? Because does P2 allow you to have? Oh, okay, okay.
It's agricultural.
No, I'm sorry. Let me rephrase it then. Is it the intention to make it commercial, or is it the intention to look at additional residential? Because there's a big difference in the tax that you're going to get out of that amount of land that we're putting money into it. I mean, wouldn't commercial generate a lot more tax revenue?
Absolutely. Current zoning is B2, which is really like a large lot with a small home that you see there. It's natural, it's allowed, it's very agricultural. The future land use talks about this being commercial, which is a different document, the future land use map, future land use plan. This project, I think, is more about providing a benefit overall to the network based on, we know this is going to be a commercial corridor. Let's start thinking about that ahead of time and getting something in place. It overall, as a system, again, we talked about looking at that at the council in that meeting back in April. April-May timeframe was, there are intersections that are bad. There's connectivity that's an issue, right? You get to some point, you don't want to go there just because the traffic's so difficult. This relieves that congestion, which, by the way, I read something interesting on that. And just the amount of congestion for a single American cost about $6,000 a year in productivity, which I thought was super random, but also kind of neat. So it's $1.4 million loss in productivity for folks to work. Agnes Street Extension.
But again, before we move on, if you go back to the map.
Sure.
What I would like to see is what would be the cost to build to the circle. That if we did look at that and did an estimate of, you know, if we're able to do it in stages, understanding the advancement of the goat field, what would it be to get to the settlers, which would be kind of the first step, which would give an entrance into, if I remember that project design, it actually was putting a roadway to coming in from the north.
Yeah, that's already going to be built, right?
Yeah, that's actually going to be
Or
developer
that's not
funded.
That's zero. 'Cause,
That
okay,
should be
sorry,
Now
developer funded.
now I'm confused. So there's $6 million. What is it that the $6 million is building?
6 million is the blue, and this is an old estimate. So it may change slightly, but this 6 million.
Right.
is
So
the
I'm
estimate
talking
we
about
have.
the blue from the stop sign at Lowe's over to the circle at Settlers, the
Yep.
cul-de-sac.
I get it.
And you said that that's already being done by somebody else?
Well, it will be a requirement of a future development. When that happens, right? When that happens, it could be later.
That'll be discussed at council tomorrow night because they're not wanting to do, the developer's not wanting to build that part of the land
Okay.
property.
So that part may be a single step, and then another step would be the rest of it? But the estimate is for the whole thing,
The estimate is for the whole thing.
so it would be good to understand an estimate just to get to the settlers if we can.
Sure.
And then we can take a look at what role or what contribution we would do on an investment.
But building out to settlers, to the cul-de-sac, what benefit in the transportation plan is it? It doesn't help the eastbound traffic in any way, shape, or form that I can see. Still feeds right out to the westbound feeder, correct? Yeah.
It takes them in and pulls the U-turn. It takes them off of it and pulls the U-turn. It does contribute to improvement. It doesn't solve everything, but you can come out of Settlers, you come on the inside lane, you pull the U-turn, you come straight up under East, like anybody else coming off of that. Actually going eastward, I mean, until the traffic study's done, God help us, anybody who lives on that road like we do, come school time, you're backed up all the way to HEB at 150. If you think you're going to go east on this, people going east, they're just going to get frustrated 3 minutes down the road, but they're still going to be sitting there for 8 to 10 light cycles.
So I've had, just because it's relevant, we've had a conversation with the school district actually about their traffic and how they're going to manage it. They are in love with this project. They like the idea of moving their traffic off of Old Austin Highway and onto a slower, a slower roadway. Again, Blakey as a whole is just, again, this is just a project that was proposed for the overall transportation network improvements. I can tell you it's some preliminary study that's happened on this intersection when this development does happen. I believe this currently functions at a C. It's actually go down to an F, and adding this brings that intersection back to the way it functions today.
But from the school, the outlet from the school is going to move 80 feet from where it is today. Because the outlet from the school is just to the right coming off of that screen. So really, you're going to get two exits and they're going to be 80 feet away and they're going to both dump on the exact same road.
or they could change the way that their route is, since we're in discussions for that now. And there'll be an adopted transportation plan for each site, because the school does bring a traffic issue. We've had conversations with the district. It's not related to this particular project, but we would like them to manage their traffic. And we've had that discussion. So, for example, this is completely useless to them. It connects
Correct.
to nothing, right? But they could move folks from here for the bus, queue here, and come back out this way and hit Jessica and make their way back down to Hasler or Childers or right? They don't have to empty here. And what we're trying to get to today is actually an approved plan for each site that we would bring to council and remove all of there's a lot of verbiage in the current chapter 12 that talks about, oh, you can't park here and it's 300 feet from this spot and 30 foot from the corner where the tree used to be. So we'd like to wipe all that away, come back with an approved traffic plan that our engineers have seen, our police chief signed off on, the school's police chief has signed off on, and then actually manage traffic that way. But then again, build the entire network and give them remove the barrier for them to get that done. So it's more like a equity of traffic flow, I suppose, if that's what you want to call it. Ready to go to the next one if you are.
There are a number of cities that require schools to keep the traffic on their property. It becomes you put the school there, and the public right-of-way streets are supposed to be for, public right-of-way and being able to transport folks. And there are a number of folks that live downtown that are not real thrilled of the number of streets that become absolutely impassable during school. So that's part of why they're having the conversation. It's better, to a certain extent, kind of becomes a quality of life. If it's better controlled from a traffic standpoint, it's easier to drop them off, it's faster to drop them off, the neighborhoods can function better. And it's what happens when you can't pass bond programs, and they'll be the first ones to tell you they're behind on building the schools, and the schools have more students in it than they ever planned, and many of us had to walk with our own feet or ride a bike to school, and now almost everybody is driven by their parents or their grandparents. I have some
Well, and they have a shortage in
experience
bus
with.
drivers. I mean, that
So
attributes to the problem.
that's a part of it. When you are approving a new school site, if you knew now what you knew then, you would not plan on queuing in public streets as a part of that. I'm sorry, you bought a house next to a school. You just can't get in and out of your driveway 2 times a day, 5 days a week.
But that was really part of the conversation, again, at council, was managing traffic at a network level. And this is one of the improvements that are proposed to help manage that. The Agnes Street extension, we talked about that a little bit earlier. That is only the match for the Agnes Street grant that was received. I believe the funding for that should be released here shortly. We're expecting July, I believe. The grant is approved. It is funded. They don't release funds until the archaeological is completed. And so that's been done, and there's a little bit of, I think, finishing up that report. So this will be a carryover from what you saw last year.
And stays the same amount, 43,000?
Same amount, yes, sir. South Street to Lovers Lane, again, the alignment is off, all still up in the air. We have here as a placeholder $3 million. I know we've had conversations about the amount here. Again, I think everything should have a capital schedule, and every project should have a schedule and a capital budget. Let's shoot for staying under it, right? But again, as we talked about earlier, some of the prices are slightly moving. This is some connectivity from South Street to Lovers Lane. I don't think we have any questions.
Based on the last executive session that we had where we talked a little bit more about this, that particular plan has not been solidified yet, right? That's like one option to do that. We talked about other options as well, or potential other options.
Crossing the railroad at that location has been decided upon.
No, I mean the crossing railroad, I am, but
Right.
we were talking about perhaps something other than right next to the jail.
Yeah, this is just again, the final alignment's not decided. Yes. And if we do, it would be safe and make sure everything was interconnected.
So still ensure we're interconnecting to MLK Technology Drive
That is the goal.
on that flyover in order to be viable, yeah.
Intersection improvements, let me give you some, instead of just saying intersection improvements, this is actually the engineering to review the intersection improvements and propose certain improvements to the intersections. So what you see here is actually at 304 and Highway 71. This is Burleson Lane. This is, again, SH 71 and what would be Hasler. There we go, sorry. And you've got Childers and Loop 150. And then last is actually at Walnut and 95. There's quite a bit of issue here with congestion and stacking. And we'd review that intersection as well.
So Trey, before you move on, you call it intersection improvements at $23,000, right? So is this a study? Because you're not going to do any improvements for $23,000.
Yeah, it's 230,000.
Sorry.
And no, you're fine. And no, you're right. This is for the engineer to study each intersection.
If you know a contractor that can do those for 23,000, we need the name.
This is actually engineering to prepare proposed improvements.
So is it a study or is it the engineering to design those?
It should be it is the study of those intersections by an engineering firm. If that makes any sense.
No. Is it the transportation study or is it the engineering to design new intersections?
It's not the design of the improvements. You'll get a technical memo at each intersection that proposes improvements with an estimated cost for future capital improvements.
And that goes through with the state transportation. So we're not ending up with a study that provides something the state doesn't agree with?
So
How does that work? Because all of those are state highways.
Right, and so we coordinate with the state of where we connect, and we will absolutely get those capital improvements at the time when they're ready. They'll have to be approved by TxDOT. But there will be coordination.
And financed by TxDOT? Funding?
No, they're not financed by TxDOT. These are improvements for the they're not actually improvements to the TxDOT roadway. They'll be improvements to our intersection streets, right, where we tie in.
Even Walnut or 95?
Walnut is a city street.
Yeah, but the connections on to that will be no financing.
For example, no, they won't fund it. So for example, this may include widening the right-of-way for a certain distance and putting an additional turn lane. They may recommend controlling a right-in, right-out turn so that people can't turn left from that intersection, things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
And that'll all be coordinated with TxDOT as we move forward.
But although they may not be funded, we can't do it if they don't place it inside one of their strategies. Am I correct?
Oh, absolutely. They have to approve the plans.
And it has to go before the commission. So
The area engineer will approve the improvements.
yeah, but anytime you go into any kind of funding cycle with TxDOT, it has to go before the commission. It's just a perfunctory.
This isn't funding for TxDOT.
I understand,
Right.
but it impacts the interface between local and state.
Sure, it does.
And they can put the stop to any of those projects at that interface.
Absolutely, they could.
So would we not, I mean, in my experience, we'd have to place it in one of the strategies, or the engineer would have to place it in one of their strategies.
I think they're saying the area engineer can sign off on it, since they're not asking
Okay.
for funding.
I mean,
Right.
if that's the case, I'm good.
That's the way I understand it. We're not asking for funding. We can always make improvements to our right-of-way. We just need to have TxDOT bless it. That's how it works with all of our improvements.
So the expectation then is we would do $230,000 worth of study to then generate
Additional
millions of dollars for the intersections. 4 intersections. I mean, we're not, like you said, we're not going to be able to do an intersection, not even for 200,000, probably. So all that funding then will come back to the city in order to create the
Yes.
budget request for
Correct.
whatever.
For future capital
a million an intersection or whatever.
Could be.
Whatever comes up. Okay. And then, again, now I look at legal. How does that tie in with B4 for this type of study and economic development?
So, can y'all hear me okay? It most likely doesn't. Typically studies of intersections, impact fee studies, maybe sometimes on master plans, but those aren't going to be typically eligible for EDC funding because they're not going to be anything that directly relates in any new or expanded business development. I mean, those intersections already exist. Studying how to re-signalize those or improve flow, you'd have to have something that shows that that's necessary for you guys to expand your economic development in that area.
Is that accurate for cities under 10,000?
Yeah, that's 505-158, that's what it says. Yeah, I mean, the directors have to believe that. They have to make a finding that that's the case.
Okay.
So if it's at a major retail center like the one at Burleson in 71, and that intersection service is a C, and we had the conversation about that makes people not want to go to that either one of those shopping centers because they can't get through the intersection, is that not a retention of business?
So that's going to be a policy decision that the board would need to make. They would have to look at that, and they would have to make that determination as to whether or not they believed that infrastructure improvement would promote or expand business.
Okay, thank you.
Ready to go to the next one? We also have the transportation impact fee, again, analysis overall, like we talked about, it's a network. Where's the impact? How are we repaid for this? And again, this had to do with the policy direction provided by City Council and how you're looking at an overall traffic network, and whether that was eligible or not. The EML.
Before you go back to that one.
Sure.
So the study is to take a look at how to charge people fees for development work in the city?
Yes, proportional share is very similar to what happens on the water and wastewater lines, right? There would be an impact fee for tying into the system, the network system, the transportation system.
So again, I'm going to go to legal.
Right, so I've never heard a business say that them paying an impact fee is beneficial to their business, and that's really what an impact fee study is. It's determining how you're going to charge someone else their fair share of the impact they're going to create on your system, which is, again, ultimately it's up to the board, but impact fees are not eligible to be paid by an EDC for a business that's coming here, and so a study on how to assess those, to me, is not going to be something that's an eligible project for an EDC to fund. So it's just not something I've done elsewhere or
Sure.
seen done elsewhere.
Okay. The Emil Neighborhood Regulating Plan, this is actually the engineering. It's pretty high level to establish a good traffic network around what could be a future, well, it's a Emil Multicultural Center, right, where there'll be recreation, things of that nature. But this is actually the Neighborhood Regulating Plan that helps with the traffic and the connectivity and that through the overall project. So it'd be the infrastructure related to a.
Trey, walk us through again where this exact
Sure.
location is, please.
Sure can. State Highway 95. Bucky's across the street. Emil
Where we are.
Emil,
You are here.
yeah, Emil Elementary to the south. Right.
Gotcha.
And we're up and
We're up right over here. Yeah, we're right here. Yeah. So again, this is the street network, the drainage. It's high-level street drainage, utilities, and it helps establish an overall cost for a future quality of life project.
What is that building?
This will actually be like a recreation center. That's what's proposed there.
Okay.
So this is to fund a regulation plan?
think of it as a site plan.
A site plan, okay.
So the study is going to create that project
what
plan,
this-
or where is that project? Or who's doing that project?
So what the neighborhood regulating plan does It establishes how the site will be laid out and how the traffic will move, where the utilities come from. It's some preliminary engineering, essentially. There is some discussion there is actually a third party that is building this that would eventually be, hopefully, city-owned and city-managed, but it is a multicultural commission that's actually putting everything together as part of the community, and they're the fundraising body. But this could very well be a bond project in 2025 when the city goes out for a larger bond issuance. But there is a goal for them to have, and again, this is some preliminary engineering to understand what it's going to take to make this happen.
I mean, I think, not to pick apart titles, but I think the fact that the title identifies it as a neighborhood plan already creates anxiety for a BEDC to be able to spend money on neighborhood plans as opposed to economic development or cultural development. Not sure.
Well, so 505152, allows a type B to invest in projects related to recreational community facilities. Mm-hmm. And so it just would have to know more. I mean, the board would have to know more about the overall plan and what your role in that would be, and then decide a policy decision whether or not that's something that you want to recommend funding. But if that's a community facility or recreational facility, things such as that, then the infrastructure that is directly associated with that is also eligible for funding. And again, that's 505152 is the section that would be relevant for that.
So council, there is a Meal Multicultural Center 5013C. They've gotten their nonprofit status. They've come before City Council in January. Was that before you, or was that your first meeting?
I don't remember, but I've seen it.
They've also gone to the school board. It's a joint project. Some of you may or may not know that's where the old Emile High School was. So during segregation, that's physically the site of the old Emile High School. So what they're wanting to do is do a recreation center, and as a part of that recreation center, preserve the history of that black school that had kids graduating for 68 years, and so that's a part of it as well. But they're really wanting full-fledged. There's a lot of folks that complain that in the city of Bastrop, there's not a lot of places for kids to go. And from a place to go play basketball, to go to arts and crafts classes, whatever. There's also some discussion, depending on how much money they can raise, of even potentially having a pool is one of the things that's been talked about. And a year-round public pool does not exist in the city of Bastrop. So from a quality of life, from recruiting, employment, and I think, as the attorney mentioned, community center, public access, recreation center, the neighborhood regulating plan is just what it happens to be called, and it's basically a site plan. It's in neighborhood being loosely termed in the limits of this project. This is where we would put the streets. It just so happens, coincidentally, since we talked about it at the Emile is another school where you can't get down MLK, which connects Highway 71 to Chestnut and is becoming more and more of an entranceway because that's a way that you get to the convention center. So some of these streets and the connectivity would address that and make it where MLK is passable even if school's about to get out. Emile and what's the other one? No, coming out east-west. What's east-west?
There
Is it just MLK
There's
and
Emile,
MLK?
MLK, Pine Street to the north.
And then Pine to the north.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then I totally understand that neighborhood regulating plan is like, we're not going to pay to lay out a subdivision of single-family residences. That seems like a weird thing. But the council did unanimously approve the ILA with the school district about it being a joint project. So that's kind of the background on it.
That's kind of where that soccer field is that's kind of used right now,
That's
right?
exactly where
okay.
the soccer field is.
for lack of a better term, it's kind of being used as a recreation place right now for soccer and for other get-togethers, whatever they may be, right? So
It's a contract, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Joe, but it's the school district has leased it to the Bastrop Youth Soccer Organization.
That's correct.
okay.
And
So-
again, but neighborhood regulating plan is just the terminology that's used in the code. It is essentially it's infrastructure and pre-engineering, yeah.
So it would be the Emil Multicultural Complex Infrastructure Study.
Sure.
And if we get things aligned in the verbiage, it becomes clear for everybody what's being funded. That would help a lot if we could keep the names connected.
Sure, and this is exactly the same level of detail you provided in the business park for the zoning concept scheme, except here we're not changing the zoning. So that's why it's a neighborhood regulating plan, but it's the same amount of information. Where do the streets go? Where do the ponds go? Right? Where's the water coming from?
So if we had to change the zoning, it would have become a zoning concept scheme.
That's correct.
Right.
Sorry, that's just study, right? So how much was the,
It was 100,000.
yeah.
Well, actually, just to be more clear, it's not to pay for the entirety of the study, isn't it? Just kind of a partial, it's kind of like our portion of it that would go towards the site layout, or what? Would it be-
You would then walk away with capital improvements that could be funded at a later date through a future funding source, whether it be that third-party entity, the city, EDC, a grant, several things. But this will give you the numbers of where to start.
But if you
And
go back
that's
to
what
the
it's about.
spreadsheet is, it's a one-time payment for $100,000.
That's correct.
It's not
That's right.
a link to. Right. The study's over, done,
Yes.
throw it on the table, chew on it.
Absolutely.
And then decide what else goes after that. So,
Correct.
but again, as we've seen every time, every study, well, most of the studies lead to extensive expenditures in some fashion. Otherwise, you wouldn't be studying it. But it does allow you to get to the point and say yes or no, with, at least with an informed set of information.
Just like you mentioned earlier, the numbers, what we originally thought was 5 million, turns into 13. This should help identify that type of issue. Transportation master plan, it's been 5 years since the last time it was done. This is just the update. We're also updating the comprehensive plan, and this is a request just to fund the transportation master plan update.
Again, I'm going to go back to legal. Overall general transportation, can you go back to the slide? Transportation master plan. BEDC's able to fund complete city master plans?
So that has been my experience. I've had EDCs participate in certain aspects of the comprehensive plan, specifically related to the region, like, for example, where your park is, you know, a proportionate share into that planning process. It's fairly common. I've not personally seen an EDC fund an entire transportation plan for the entire community. That's a decision and conversation for you guys to have.
So if the transportation plan included an extensive amount related to residential and residential traffic flow, that's a challenge?
Well, so again, you know, it has to fit your definition of project, and so it has to expand or promote new business enterprise. So, you know, how you accomplish that or how that fits into what is an eligible project is going to be what's critical. You know, you are fewer than 20,000 is the break point, but it's still a project. It's still land, buildings, equipment, facilities, expenditures, targeted infrastructure and improvements found by the board of directors to promote new or expanded business development. And so, you know, when we write a resolution for this board to approve, that's the finding that's required in that resolution before you can authorize those funds. And again, you know, ultimately, the city council has to approve, you know, any of your programs and expenditures. And so we want to make sure that if we're sending something forward for them to approve, that it's legal when it gets there.
So as you talked about proportional, you've generally seen it where it's proportional split between EDCs and cities or others?
So
or-
it's not uncommon for EDCs to be asked to fund aspects of a comprehensive plan. And it usually, now, there's different parts to that. It can be, where are you? You're an essential part of the conversation. Where are you targeting industrial growth, manufacturing growth? Because that's going to have different demands on water, sewer, streets. Want to make sure that the comprehensive plan contemplates that in the future zoning. Y'all were talking about earlier, is this going to be residential here? Is this going to be, what is it going to be? Because that's important to this board as to what's planned there before you invest in that infrastructure. The same thing, it goes for that aspect of the plan. What that share is the conversation that has to be had, though. What is an appropriate portion of that for you to contribute, but that would be wise. That's just for future planning purposes is where you see that growth.
So let me ask you a question, Trey. The transportation master plan, do you have an area that it covers? Is it strictly the city limits? Is it outside the city limits? Do we have, it's nice to call it a master plan, but what all does
Sure.
it entail?
We do actually coordinate with the county, somewhat on the overall, right? And we generally incorporate their master transportation plan into ours for the thoroughfares. We also talk to TxDOT, everybody that comes through the city. It's not just the local city streets, but it's how we're connected from here all the way to Austin, essentially. Yeah, that's correct. And again, this is an update to that overall traffic plan that we currently have. And it's about a little engineering and how things are impacted, as we continue to implement that strategic plan, which is exactly what you talked about, the comprehensive plan, the strategic planning, things that go into that. We want to make sure that we're prepared for the future, and that's what this is about.
So how do we determine the proportionality of it if we don't know the size of it? How do we in our minds go, well, it's $200,000. What proportion is that to the overall plan? How big is the overall plan? Because if we're talking,
Yeah,
and that's what I'm asking
we,
for.
we can absolutely get you the existing plan.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That alignment of Blakey at the very beginning on the master plan.
Correct.
So
There's several projects, and it'd be good to vet those, make sure they still work. Should we move some things into the business park, right? Should we? That's the conversation. This is truly
Yeah, Councilmember Plunkett saying when you look at that, and the transportation master plan's on our website. It's readily available. There is a need for additional bridges across the Colorado River, and they're shown on the transportation master plan. And it's that first step. It doesn't mean that you've gone out and purchased property. It doesn't mean that you know exactly where the funding's going to come from. It may be hazardous mitigation grant. At one point there were conversations and there was monies that were available for evacuating the coast for hurricanes. And 71 is a reverse evacuation route where you change direction and have all the traffic coming out to try to get people safely off. So our transportation master plan, to Trey's point, covers outside of the city limits but coordinates with Campo and other regional transportations. But it's the big roads, it's the skeleton, so to speak.
and it is specific to the city and the ETJ. However, we coordinate with the county and at the state level so that they all interconnect. That's how it works.
But is not an update normally required to enhance your opportunities to
For
secure
funding.
grants and funding?
That's correct.
Especially in this day and
They're
age.
generally updated every 5 years.
Yeah,
We're at our
should
5th
be.
year. And you're exactly right. If there's something on the plan that gets adopted by the city and by the county, they can then champion that project, so can TxDOT, to seek the funding that you talked about.
But it also places us ahead of the game for
right.
unexpected events such as, I don't know, Tesla?
Yes, absolutely.
So.
Yeah. Yes.
We all know that BEDC was going to fund Agnes, and then we got a grant, and part of why we scored better on the grant is because we have a master transportation plan and that road is shown on the master transportation plan. So that makes you score higher, and then you get, that's why we got the grant for Agnes.
You ready? Last one is actually the CIP, which is the fiber optic network that we've talked about in the past, and the broadband study. This is phases 1 and 2. Again, there's been a lot of discussion around this here recently. In 2023, there would actually be a $2 million cost. We're still gathering some additional information as we move forward, or I think a final decision's made. But again, this is just the capital improvements that are proposed. We've actually got some additional information today from the school district as it relates to where the homes are with internet and without. The information is a little older, so they're actually going to give some additional information. And then with that, we'll bring it back to council at a later date.
Yeah, like you said, I don't think there's enough information to make any kind of, decision or anything today about that particular project.
And finally, just overall, just to summarize everything and what the total cost was for all the projects that we went through from 2023 to 2027. And that assumes cash, that assumes bond issuance, and several other components which Tracy can talk a lot more eloquently about than I can. But over the next 5 years, that's a $24 million investment.
I'm sorry, so what is it this year?
This year is $6.6 million.
That's the proposal.
Well, that includes $2 million for the fiber optic.
It does.
Okay, so
That's correct.
until we get to that point, now it's 4.
Yeah, that's right. And again, this is just capital budgeting purposes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All this finally nails down that day right before it's adopted, pretty much. With that, I think we'll take any more questions.
I have one for Tracy. Maybe you might be able to help with that. What would be a reasonable bond capacity that we have given our revenue and our current financial position, outstanding bonds? What kind of?
Well, if we go back to the fiscal forecast that we provided, I mean, that kind of plugs that in. We plugged in 20 million of bonds into this fiscal forecast, and there was still plenty of available ending working capital.
But that was 20 million in order to back finance with about 1.5 million a year for 20 years. So that 20 million became 30 million payout over 20 years. Interest rate back calculated somewhere around 4.25% at the time, whether that's still valid or not. And the other part is, out of that, there was no consideration for any investment or work in the build out of the BIP, the industrial park, at all. And so that part, those parts all kind of need to fit together.
Yeah, and we communicated that we didn't have those numbers at the time.
Correct.
So.
But we'll work on a budget. We've got that going in.
And
so.
you also don't know if you will cash fund or debt fund some of this infrastructure in the industrial park as well.
Yep.
So.
Right. So that's why I was curious about capacity versus, whatever let's say we adopt the whole CIP budget, and we plan out for 21 million in bonds. Where does that put us to our effective cap, or from being able to finance it, at a reasonable rate, for another project that comes along where we may have to borrow money to do that project or something.
Right. We'll have to look at that. I mean, once y'all have thrown out some numbers tonight that I've written down, if we can work some of that in here as well. The fiscal forecast is an ongoing document that we're always updating. So every time we get new information, we go in, we plug it into the fiscal forecast. When we do determine whether we're going to cash fund or debt fund, that gets plugged in. That gives us the bottom line, and we can see it out 5, years ahead of time, so we can kind of tell what is our working capital looking like. So you have quite a bit at this point, so got a lot of wiggle room there.
We do have some leeway on the funding. The other part is when you look at all those studies that are proposed, each of those are going to generate large demands. None of those studies are, we can do that for $1 million. Those are multi-million-dollar effect studies that once you take 1 year and cap, you're capped for the next 20, essentially. Because now you're running an office, you've got your income, it's not changing significantly, and you're paying a lot of bond debt back. So if you cap that out, you pretty much stop development beyond what's on that list for the next 20 years until you pay that thing off.
Yeah, and we do have, with all of these projects, or most of these projects, comes additional sales tax, which then flows into the top. So all of that has to be considered.
But along with additional sales taxes is inflation, which is actually going up, as well as other costs and operating costs going forward. Though it does escalate, but both the costs and the income generally move together in terms of escalating. Again, we looked at not hiring everybody out, CEO get on board, but then at the same time, not sure that maxing out the funding and mortgaging the farm all the way to the point that a director comes on board either. So there's going to be a good balance on how we're preparing for the future.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Kevin's question differently. You settled on a number of 20 million, and I know it was just for that first pass in April. Did you consider it maxed out?
No. And it's also, when are we going to sell it? When's the project going to go? We only sell bonds when we need the cash. We don't just sell them all up front and then draw the cash as the projects come along. So we're going to pace those out depending on what the projects are. Would you like to talk?
Well, and not trying to steal Tracy's time here, but these projects will come back to you every time, right? This is just some really high-level assumptions. And we do understand how to manage debt and how to restructure debt to make sure that we can extend this out and it's affordable. Again, her assumptions, I would encourage you to look at those. It assumes 5% growth. It could be more than that. I believe that's higher than that. It's, yeah. That's what's important.
So if we go back and look at our numbers at this point, where we said forget the projects, forget the $4 million projects, we end up being about 3 million with an income of 4.2. If you add in the additional proposed, again, just an item 20 million, that's 1.5 million. That essentially takes us to 4.5 million expenses a year with an income of 4.3. Again, without going through the details of what pulls off everyone, essentially you're running a negative budget.
Are you considering what you're putting into working capital this year? Because we left a lot on the table as well.
There's about $1 million. So what I'm looking at is cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
We also have money in the bank. We know that as well. We also have debts and obligations. We know that as well.
Right.
So what my reference was the 1.5 million a year of financing is presented by the city manager to the city council for $20 million essentially would take us to cash flow negative, at least for next year in that philosophy, or close to maybe balanced at that point. Mm-hmm. 3 million plus 1.5 million is 4.5 million. Income's 4.2 million. I don't know how else you can say it. That's kind of where the basics are right now. I don't have, 10-year spreadsheets running on all the finances. I'm just talking about the basics of what was loaded up. Mm-hmm.
Let me go back and ask a additional question of the Blakey Lane extension. You've got it right now at $6 million for the next really year and a half, almost 2 years, yeah. So will it be finished in 2024, or will it go past that?
So the goal would be to engineer it next year, right, and then start the construction as soon as we complete the engineering. It could overrun. There's always an opportunity for, materials to not be there. But the goal would be to be finished with it. But at that point, you would have already issued the debt, and then you'll know what your interest rate, I guess, and what your payment's going to be at that point. It may be a carryover, but the project would be funded and completed, and hopefully by '24.
I'm just trying to get a better understanding. I mean, is it going to be like a 2-year project? It sounds like it is going to be. It can be completed, the study and the engineering and the construction can be all completed and everything in a 2.5-year time frame?
It'll likely take 6 months, if I had to guess, to design, including procurement, and probably 12 months to build, so 18 months to 24 total.
Great, thank you.
And the easements and right-of-way are already owned by the city?
Nope.
So is that timetable you just said include legal and all of the right-of-way and all that, or is that another year before?
I have had some preliminary discussions with the owners. They're not going to give you the right of way until they know you're going to build a street. That's a conversation we could absolutely have. If you're suggesting that we take the right of way, that'd be a discussion for me to have with council before we actually funded it. But I think there's an opportunity, and everybody's excited about that happening. I do think there's some synergy around it.
And that funding amount includes payments for right-of-way and all of that to the landowner in that estimate, or is that only your engineering to build the road?
It's only the engineering to build the road.
Let's finish that sentence. Do we have at least an idea of what it may cost?
Yeah, so we have some, there are some $8 a square foot's a pretty good average for now. 8, anywhere from 8 to 16. I've seen appraisals on both ends, depending on exactly where you're at. What's in the rear of the property will probably appraise for a little less than what's up at the front, right? So depending on your location, it can be anywhere from 8 to 16. I do think there's an obligation for these property owners to dedicate the right-of-way anyway, since it's on the master transportation plan, and would be a requirement of their development when they plat. And what we're doing today is making the property more valuable and a spot to develop. I mean, that is, and while managing a traffic issue. And the land could go. She was asking if the land goes towards a proportional share. It very well could. All right, and that could be something we could negotiate with the landowner.
Well, thank you very much for the discussions on each one of these things. We have a much better understanding of each one of them, what the impact is and whatnot. I think that we're going to need to make a decision on if on the intersection improvements, transportation impact fee. Both were stated by legal that that's kind of a policy decision if we agree that that's something that fits the bill of the funding, right? I mean, of the legality of it. So that, maybe we need a further discussion on that with attorneys.
Ron, you're going to have to speak.
Sorry, maybe we're going to need a little more direct discussion, one-on-one discussion with the attorneys on this, so that we have a really clear understanding, so that when we do decide that this is something we're going to do, then we can say yes and feel good about it versus it's kind of iffy. I just don't want to get any kind of iffy feelings going on. Okay. We had other items to discuss as well, if I'm not mistaken. The education and workforce development programs?
We increased those based on the meeting we had yesterday.
Oh, okay. All
So
right.
we did the education and we did the others, so that's captured, those are captured in there.
Okay.
So we're really at the point now where I need direction as to what we're agreeing to put in the budget or not put in the budget for the BEDC budget that would be proposed to the board, or
Well,
to the city council.
I mean, I think for what we've talked about, I think just as kind of a, I don't know what the right word would be, but on the surface, it looks good to me. I think we still have some discussion points when it comes to the legality of a couple of them, but other than that, I mean, to me, it looks pretty all-encompassing. I think you've captured everything that needs to be captured on this thing from the viewpoint that we have right now. I don't know, I'm not sure we can like approve or, you know, or vote or anything like that when it comes to this, because we still have a couple of points we don't have a complete understanding of.
So we can't approve. I think that's what we have to do. We have to get to the point of agreement.
I know, yeah.
And so in the point of choosing what we do and what we include in the budget, we can do that, and we should do that as a board, of the BEDC board, and to put what in there. So that the idea is the input came from Trey and Tracy.
Mhm.
The mayor is liaison to the board. And so at this point, we need to make decisions as to, if you want, we can go by each one. We can identify what we think should be in the budget, what we're comfortable with, and include it or not include it in the
Okay.
budget. And we can choose to do that by a vote. But again, at this point, it's a non-binding vote. It's a non-line item binding vote. It's more of a consensus vote. It does not have to be unanimous, but we got to reach a point that says, what are we going to stick in the budget?
Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, this is, I think, more of a head nod situation. We won't approve a final budget by vote, I don't believe, until we get to the final. Isn't that correct?
Correct. And we will also not approve any project that is listed or presented here in our discussion today. It's strictly just what would we include financially, which gives us better instructions to be able to go back and say, you know, do we need to refinance? Do we expect 5 million, 10 million, 20 million, 30 million? You know, if you add them all up, it's over 30 million.
And then that would allow us to have an updated fiscal forecast and see exactly where we are. That's where
Correct.
we're going,
And that's
correct?
where we need to go. So if you're comfortable with that, Ron, we could kind of go through them one by one, and I'll read through them and kind of, let's say, give some comment, and then let's have a brief discussion of what to
All right.
include.
I think it's a good idea. Thank you, Bill.
So we have Blakey Lane, which we've seen, 1 million, and then subsequent 5 million, and may not include all the costs. Again, some costs having to do with acquisitions and right-of-ways. I don't have any basis to say it would be more than 6, but I also, based on the way I see projects go, I would be very hard-pressed to see that jump in 2 years and be done. My recommendation would actually be going 1, 2, and 2. Give some room to have it happen over time with the study. We can always adjust a budget. If fantastic, it flies forward, we can find $1 million to move it up. If, unfortunately, it gets delayed for whatever trappings, we're only half wrong. So that, you know, my recommendation would be go 1, 2, and 2 on Blakey. Yeah, sorry, 1, 2.5, and 2.5 would be fine. If stretch that out, if we agree on Blakey, if Blakey is something, maybe that's the beginning. Do we do Blakey or not Blakey, or only part of Blakey?
Wasn't it discussed last week that the developer wanted to get started rather quickly?
Only on the
next
goat
year
field. Only on the goat field. The other one doesn't have anything.
So we can at
The
least
hay
get
field
that
has
started.
nothing. The goat field is what they're pushing.
And just so we know, your goat field is the one next to Lowe's?
Yeah, the left one.
Okay, thank you.
And the hay field's on the right.
It's a little offensive to refer to it as the goat track, we've learned, and we can call it
Is it?
Burleson East,
Oh,
since it's an
that's a much
official
better,
project.
thank you. Burleson East, I like that.
The other possibility would just be to build to, propose to build just to settlers until there's more that pops up on the other side, but that's also a little bit,
I don't disagree that 1 year turns into 2 years all the time, particularly with fiscal year starting on October 1. And whether it's 1 and 5 or 1, 2, 3 or 1, 2.5, 2.5 or whatever, it sounds like the 1 for next year is really what we would be approving in the budget. And as we get into it and do the design, we'd have a better feel for, does it make sense to do it in a section? Does it make, is something coming in on the other track and we'll get the right of way?
Except for, once you put the million in, you're committing yourself. I mean, I don't believe it's right to put $1 million in and then say, well, let's look at it again and see whether we support it or not.
Well, I'm just saying whether it's 1, 2, 3 or 1, 2.5, 2.5,
Right.
it's kind of 6 of one, half dozen of the other. And it's also fair to say that I'm sure Councilmember Plunkett would agree as well. We will certainly be going after any potential grants that we can get. But from an economic development standpoint, I don't know if there's any part of town that's more commercial development.
Yeah, it seems to me that right there, highest and best use would be for commercial application, because that's where you get, that's why I said, is it going to be commercial or is it going to be residential?
I can see it being really nice condos or some sort of a multifamily coming out of the neighborhood to multifamily to retail. You know, somebody could make a case for that if they wanted. But the P4, P5, it's on the land use plan as commercial. I'm just saying, you know, until you're the person purchasing that property, you don't know exactly how they're going to plan it out.
Right, and I guess that's a little bit of the hesitancy there of, since we don't know. I mean, overall, I agree with it, but it kind of like I hate to use the word caveat, but if it were to be multifamily properties, as an example, or residential, I would probably hesitate. I mean, if I knew
That's
that's
not workforce development housing and employees
well,
for the...
we've already, the other project going on that we discussed already is looking at apartments and multifamily stuff. So is it a suggestion that that would be right for additional multifamily properties?
I think the market drives that and the developers decide.
True.
I mean, as far as, you know, if you're laying odds, I mean, mixed use is probably, from an EDC perspective, the worst case scenario on this property. Because, I mean, you're not going to put residential right up against the highway. And, you know, so that's going to be commercial. I mean, there's just no, and so, yeah, it does.
So to kind of go around the table with a head nod this way or this way, do we support Blakey Lane being developed?
Yeah,
Yes.
I would say yes.
All right.
Top
Are you comfortable?
priority.
What?
Top priority.
Well, again, is that the top priority over development of our own business park? And when we get a financing and what we can do, that would be one of the discussions on the priorities. So understood your point. But I want to make sure that we haven't forgotten, we got an industrial park that we own that we committed to wanting to make shovel ready as well. So we'll get to that when we get to the financing part. Okay. So any issue, Trey, seeing it drawn out 1, 2, 3 or 1, 2.5, 2.5? I mean, what's your?
I'm going to let Tracy manage the money. I'm just going to make
Well,
sure it gets built.
It's a project execution.
Sure.
Where do you see that you're going to be spending your money?
Yeah,
What-
and so starting in October, we would absolutely pull the trigger on some engineering here. They're going to come back with an overall cost estimate, right?
And speed to execute, 1, 2, 3?
Right, exactly. And I think 2 years is good. I think if we need to structure the debt in a certain way because we couldn't afford it for some reason, then yeah, we stretch it out. But overall, I think this is a solid project, and the quicker the better. I do think it will help spur some development in this area.
But we're doing a spending plan, not the financing plan. So the spending plan to execute this project would be, you're guaranteeing that you're going to get this done in 2 years, so it needs to be a 1.5, or do you think it's going to drag into the next year, the next fiscal year?
I think if you're finishing up in the next fiscal year, or if you're finishing up in 25, it's because you're paying out the last few retainage. The project is complete by that time. You may be wrapping up, but that is.
So we go
I
1,
think
4,
1 and
1, 4,
5.
1.
Sure.
All right.
Well, and also, if we're gonna, if we're saying we're debt findings, that's at least the bucket that it's in right now. We would do the bond for the project. So we would have the funds if if it was escalated and we got it done in '24, or if it trickled over into '25.
You wouldn't bond a portion, you'd bond the whole
Right.
project.
I mean, if we're gonna.
Understood, but this is just one of many projects and not the biggest either. So that's why I want to kind of get the spending done first, otherwise you're not going to be able to do the financing side. So if we get spending correct according to the people that are doing it, we can then add those up and do an effective financing plan. So, okay. So 141. Agnes Street is already in the budget, the 1%, 43,000. I don't think there's any discussion there. South Street to Lovers Lane, $3 million, $2 million, somewhere between 2 and 3. Are we comfortable doing the build out of Lovers Lane flying into South Street?
Yeah, I think so, because it does impact the BIP as well, so yes, it makes sense. As far as I'm concerned, it makes sense because it does impact part of the BIP that is what we're going to be looking at anyway, so I think it makes sense myself.
Yes.
Agreements? All right. 2 million versus 3 million. We've heard both numbers. My preference would be go to 3 million. I think we're highly, there's more actors involved in this that could contribute to some
And
slowdown on this.
Bridges over railroad tracks is not something that you do every day, and there can be.
I also don't believe this is going to happen in 1 year from zero to built in 12 months. So, Trey, I'm going to look at you again. What do you, we also have the money to Technology Drive MLK for that intersection. We have at 1.5, we extended that to 2, so we've got work there as well. How do you see the project spending to execute a flyover the railroad track?
You're right. I do think it's going to take longer than 12 months. I do think it was in here just because it was an issuance of debt at some point, right, where you would issue a lump sum at one time and then manage it over the life of the project. I think it's 18 to 24 months.
I think 1, 2, or
I would go 1, 2 at best.
1,
If you
2
think
works.
either that or it'd be 503.5. I think we're going to get stuck in engineering and negotiating and persuading for a long time before we actually turn over a shovel.
Some people are friendly and it doesn't take as long.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question on that one, just because I'm doing a flyover? So on the railroad, have you already got an agreement with the railroad in place?
We've had some preliminary discussions with the railroad, ongoing for the past 6, 8 months. There is not something in place because they want to see some design.
Which railroad is it?
Union Pacific.
Okay, so just on your timing, I've been dealing with Union Pacific for over 18 months in another city already, and the level of detail that they want and the studies that they want and how you have to do that, that's my only question on that, because it's a lengthy process to cross a railroad.
Thankfully, we're not trying to do it at grade, which helps a little bit.
So I would recommend a 0.5, 2.5.
It's more realistic.
Hmm?
More realistic.
Yeah. But
we're just budgeting.
Right.
I think it's a good point because we're just budgeting it right now, and we do need to be careful about that. I agree. So dividing it up 1 and 2, I think.
1 and 2?
I think 1 and 2 would be a better.
Agreeing?
Okay.
Head nodding? Thank you. So we'll do 1 and 2. All right. Independent, let's say intersection study improvement, $230,000. These are the ones that are not able to be done under BEDC. It needs board decision if this is what we're going to pursue in terms of business development.
From my point of view, I mean, I'm looking at the other transportation-related stuff, impact fee, the Emile Neighborhood Regulation Site Plan and then Master Plan. To me, those make a lot of sense. The intersection improvement, They're already existing intersections. You're not going to have more businesses because they're already taken up. There's no land there to attract any business. There's no land there to sell. So, sure, I'd rather, if it made it easier to drive around the area, that would be nice for all of us that live here, but it doesn't really, just in my opinion, it doesn't really fit within retaining or going and getting more business. To me, it just doesn't. But that's my opinion.
I have a little bit different take on it. I think it's an impediment to development, because if it's difficult for people to ingress and egress, it's going to make people go elsewhere other than to a Bastrop business. Certainly, we're not going to be able to grow any more businesses there, but we can certainly enhance the accessibility to those businesses.
Well, when you look at all that, you've already got commercial businesses already on each of those corners. So it would.
No, Burleson East, you have nothing. And
I'm
you
not-
talk about having.
I'm under the impression that can you go back to the
150 Hasler and Walnut. is what
right,
they're
150 Hassler and Walnut, right, and those already have existing businesses that on each one. Yeah, if you'll move that. Thank you. Okay, Burleson East is, that one, sure, that doesn't have anything right there, but when you look at Hassler and then you look at 95, those are all taken up right now.
But isn't Burleson East also going to be part of the study of the development of the Burleson East?
No, because
there's an impact on that.
That's Blakey. We're talking Blakey. We're not talking about that
No, I'm
intersection.
talking about the development that's going in to Burleson East.
It depends on what council approves tomorrow night. The developer does not want to participate in those intersections and has no plans to do it.
Okay. And I kind of agree with Ron. The way I look at this is that, that's, if those studies need to be done, I think the city can do those studies. I'm struggling a little more with BEDC funding these studies. And I would recommend against funding those studies through the BEDC. Not saying that they're not necessary, they're not required. I just think it's a little more of a stretch for the BEDC to fund those. It's just my opinion. You don't believe we should fund them? So,
Based on what our attorney said?
yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Mind being a little more clear, yeah means you understand,
No,
or yes,
I
you
do-
want to do it?
No, I don't want to do it.
Okay,
then.
thank you.
Yeah.
Don't want to do it. Okay. Lyle?
I still think it's that not doing the study as the Economic Development Corporation is the wrong move. I think we should, so I'll see.
Support it?
No, I won't support it. I'll support the fact that doing the study,
Right.
but I can't support the recommendation.
Right, support study, yeah. Kevin?
I think from the standpoint of the businesses that are existing there, especially like, Hassler, you see the issues with the traffic there quite often. And with the additional traffic that we're going to be putting on as we develop out Pecan Park, I think it's, and 304 is obvious, something needs to be done there too. So I think it would have a pretty big sales tax impact.
Can I help you with something that might make sense? What this study will do is probably provide you with some opportunity for future economic development, because we'll understand what the proportional impacts are on those intersections. So what we're talking about is exactly at that intersection, but this guy right here is going to have an impact on this intersection. We'll know what those improvements need to be. We'll know what his share is going to be. That's an opportunity later on for you to say, hey, you know what? We've got that. We know what this share is. You can give that back. From a study standpoint, it makes sense to understand it. It's a tool in your toolbox for later on, which is the point of the study.
I guess I can understand that part of it, but let's kind of run the string out maybe a little bit more, okay? Sure. So the study says that we need to redo those intersections, but we need to widen the intersections to allow for more traffic, right? That kind of is the logical conclusion that that it would lead to a widening. Well, you're impacting like 4 or 5 businesses at each intersection, right? So, are we going to then suggest that we I don't know if encroach is the right word, but take away either parking areas or take away businesses because we need to expand that? Because every one of those intersections that I can see has a company, has a business on it, except for maybe right there where you turn into off of 150, and you've got the new walking trail that we just put in there. So, but I look at the other ones, except for Burlington East and maybe the northeast side of 150. There's businesses there on each one of them. So what would you do? Would you then go, okay, sorry businesses, we're going to take away some of your space? And that, to me, how does that encourage new business? It improves traffic. I don't disagree with that. But how does it encourage new business?
That's what the study would have to show.
So a couple of things. There are a lot of businesses that have been paying towards this sales tax since the beginning of time that say, you're not doing anything for me. There's a lot of concentration on Main Street. You give developers money to in 380 agreements, but I've been a property owner for 25 years, and I have people that don't pull into my business because it's backed up traffic. And what are you doing to help me out? Not all of the money has to be for new businesses. There's, I'm looking at Gene. There was a time we had dedicated retention trips where we went and visited business to say to them, you are an important part of our community and we want you to stay in our community. But I hadn't really thought about the angle that Trey had from a BEDC standpoint as when he's, I can't read those R numbers, but like 7227, when he said like, okay, you're a new store that's right there and you're going to impact those other two intersections, you would be able to do proportional share. So when we do 380 agreements, it could be, well, we've invested in those intersections ahead of your business coming. So that's a portion of where we are helping existing and we're making things better for future businesses, both at the same time, so you get kind of two bangs for the buck. To your discussion on you're going to take away their parking, you very, very often, the edge of the pavement is not at the edge of the right-of-way. And so and you've got right-of-way available, and sometimes what you need at the intersection is a free right turn lane that merges. Sometimes it's restriping. Sometimes it's not allowing a turn out of one lane, but a turn out of two lanes. So it's not always about we need to add another 20-foot wide of pavement. And those kind of things is my understanding of what the intersection study is going to tell you. Because you can't widen the distance between the bridges. But there is a way to manage the traffic on each side of those intersections so that you can allow not freeway like freeway, but free turns and improved flow. So I do think it impacts the businesses. I think it not only impacts the potential of future new businesses, but it also helps some of our existing businesses as well.
And again, sales taxes to the BEDC, it's also to the city. 380 agreements are arranged by the city. City benefits as well as the BEDC on these developments as well. So
I would hope that the city and the BEDC together are benefit always together.
Can I complete?
Yeah.
Can I complete my comment? Okay. So in that approach, I believe that it makes sense to, if we do move forward, that we move forward jointly. And, if it needed a study, to split the study with a study cost with the city and the BEDC if we need to move forward.
Not sure I'm connecting the dots.
Split the cost 50-50.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Since both benefit.
Mm-hmm. Since all parties are benefiting from it and all parties are contributing and have different parts that look forward to it, it could have an, because you're touching all kinds of intersections.
So let me clarify there. Let me ask maybe a further question to it. Is it just those three intersections? That's all you're looking at?
There was, yeah.
Walnut, right, Walnut. Okay, yeah. So why are we referencing that one right there where the pecan grove thing is. I just didn't understand that.
His point was when that develops, because it's already got plans to develop, that when they get out, they're going to one of those intersections. So that new business will be an impact
Because
to
that's
those
ag.
intersections.
Or they're coming across Agnes and heading out 304 and
Got
heading
it.
south. There's multiple exits to it. But the point is that I think the overall knowledge that you gain from that is going to, could benefit the city and the BEDC as well in the future developments. And a lot of that is all going to trigger large projects. There is no simple little project that's going to come out of any of that study. And then the time is going to go into play. How are we going to prioritize that in the city's, road development plans and so forth?
All right. Well, I mean, based on that, I guess I could change my position here and look at that and be more positive about it. I just, I mean, the way I look at it, if I'm the landowner and you guys are talking about taking part of my stuff, I'd be very against that. But I understand for the betterment of traffic flow and for, like you said, perhaps making a right-hand turn specifically instead of waiting in line, that would make a lot of sense too. I guess I'm sensitive to existing small companies that own the property right there on that intersection and how it would impact them. I know it's just a study right now, but what it could lead to might have a different discussion.
Well, and again, I think you may find some of them tell you that people don't pull in because they can't get out. And they're losing out on business now because of the traffic. Which is the kind of stuff that's the purpose of the study. Director Gossett, can you clarify what are the improvements that you see for the city that are not for BEDC?
What I said is they jointly have benefits in this. Essentially, a 380 agreement is done by the city, not by BEDC. And so when you talked about the 380 agreement development.
The BEDC does the 380s.
No, we do not. So just
But
to make
you
it sure.
participate in
We
them.
can participate in, but we
Yes.
don't do the 380s legally. So that's where the city contributes from that, like the performance agreements that we do as well for projects.
Right.
And that's why I said all parties benefit from that. The city gets to see development opportunities, flow, future. It's kind of like a transportation study in a small area, and then from the economic development point of view, you have a better idea of things that can be developed, or in an economic retention kind of view, as you pointed out. It could have benefits. It might not, depends on what the study is. So my point of view was, I think it's a good 50-50 type project to go forward and funded with the city and the EDC together. Because there's a priority, when you look at these four, there's different levels of benefits out of each intersection. They're all not at the same level of let's say, economic development point of view. When you look at Walnut in 95, you pretty much got a locked-in area that just needs to be improved. When you get an area back in this, you end up with areas of future development. So that's why I look at it as at best about a 50-50, joint city and BED study. That was my point. All right. Any other comments?
Yeah, I have one additional comment. I'm having trouble rectifying that benefits are mutually exclusive. What benefits BEDC benefits the city is my thinking. Am I off in that thought process? It's all for the benefit of the community, and so they have it mutually exclusive. I don't quite.
It's not
understand.
mutually exclusive. It's mutually beneficial, and then both parties participate in it. The part that's actually that can be some of the troublesome part is defining clearly the economic development benefit of the study in some of these intersections, which may not have a growth opportunity, let's say, for them. In particular, 95 and Walnut is just one that kind of comes to mind. That's a struggle for economic development, just in the view of it right now. Yes, it improves traffic flow for one customer or one company.
Kind of a big one.
It's a big one. So, but that's why I look at it in terms of coming through and how to define that.
Well, I think we need to ask everybody again, okay? Because I think with what was discussed, to further the discussion, I think perhaps I would change my opinion about it, that I would probably be more in favor of it than what I said earlier, so.
100% or 50/50?
I mean, 50/50 would be great. I just don't know how we take it out of here and then ask the city to put up basically $115,000. I mean, that's their budget. That's not ours. So I don't know what would be the right process in order to do that.
Well, both parties are putting their budgets together currently with input back and forth. That's kind of what the budget process is. So, you know, having the ability to say that we would fund it BEDC up to 50% is acceptable within a budget program, and then the city can reach forward and say, you know what, we have no money whatsoever to contribute to that. We choose not to participate, and we would hold off and wait another year maybe. So you want to go around? How do you?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we're going to have to make a decision here. I mean, I think when we come up to the two big projects that we have coming up here, that's going to probably be more than what we think it's going to be, and it's probably going to be longer than we think it's going to be. These are small. I'm going to change my opinion. I'm going to say yes. Let's go ahead and go for that. Let's go ahead and do that 100%.
Full funding?
Full funding.
Jen?
That's what.
Kevin?
I'm fine with all.
I'm 50%.
Full for me.
Jeff?
I'd rather see it 50%.
Okay. So based on that, if we just go on the majority, we'd fund it 100% and go on?
Right.
Unless you want to do 25/70. No, just kidding. Just kidding.
Can we make this meeting last as long as?
It's still raining. We're waiting for the clouds to clear out. So. All right.
Okay.
The next one, transportation impact fee. That's $80,000. You know. Yeah. When again, based on the legal advice on this one, I would highly recommend we just stay away from that one and let that be done by the city as they see fit.
I would agree with that. I think we should stay away from that one.
Kevin?
I think we can fund it, but it's not worth the fight. It's $80,000.
Jeff?
Agreed, yeah.
Agreed what? Fund or not fund?
No.
Not fund?
Yeah.
Okay. Lyle?
Not worth the fight.
Okay. I agree. No. All right. So we'll skip that one. A meal neighborhood plan. That's $100,000. Again, I think it's a little bit of a misnomer.
I think we should rename it. to
Yeah,
start
if it was a
with.
meal neighborhood plan, I say no. But I think if we, a meal multicultural complex infrastructure study is really hard to shoot holes into. Legal? Yeah? Okay.
Yes?
I think it fills a lot of needs that we have. I think the one thing that I would ask for very clear clarification is it or is it not going to include a swimming pool is one, because the second question I have is we have something called a sports complex study that we've already agreed to, which now we've got this multicultural. What kind of overlap or what is there between the sports complex study and this study?
I will take a shot at it only because I was on the board when and Ron can speak up as well because we were both on the board when the original strategic plan was done. Whether or not there's a pool depends on fundraising, and it may be a second phase or whatever, but it is intended to be a community, recreation, cultural, exactly what it says. And I think the exact name, I have the card on my desk, and I apologize to Charles Washington Jr. if he's watching us online that I can't rattle it off. But I think it's a meal, multicultural, and recreation complex. That is the absolute name of it. Is it on there?
It's just a multicultural complex.
But that's what their architect, who's, I think, yeah. I think the official name of their 5013C includes recreation complex. So yes, it's intended to have recreation. So I don't think anybody can guarantee a pool. I think it's absolutely their intent is to try to do a pool if they can. For the sports complex, my understanding, and Kevin may chime in, and I didn't mean to, you and Ron, all three of us were on when that was going on. It was more of a regional where they do the big soccer tournaments. Think about the sports complex. I don't know if some of you've been to the one in San Marcos where you have people come from all over. They come and stay in the hotels. And so the sports complex was that study. My understanding of that study was going to be evaluate what's 2 hours away, how many fields would you need, how much property would you need, where might you locate that property, would you have hotels to support it, that sort of a thing. And it was from a recreational but very, very much an economically driven, they come, they spend the weekend, they celebrate, they drown their sorrows, but it's an economic development and a little bit of quality of life, because if you live here, you're not always taking your kids and grandkids to Dallas or far away. It would be.
But already
here.
determined to be a soccer system.
No.
Okay, it was just an
No,
example.
That was
Okay,
just an
right.
example.
Okay, just to
And
clarify.
in
It's
fact,
like field sports, right?
Right,
Yeah,
very
field
much
sports.
Flexible to where it's.
well, but this is a tourism play more than a,
Tourism, economic development.
right, more than a,
Quality of life.
quality of life for residents. So, yeah, it's not a place you would typically put the community pool because it's probably going to be out a ways from town, just given the tracts of land that would likely be needed. And, so, yeah, it's not the kind of place that would usually have a pool, I wouldn't think.
And honestly, it's all about, we're all kind of learning. You make the best decision you can with the information that you have at the time, and things change. And at one point, there were phone calls getting made of, well, you've had, 15 years, 10 years, whatever, at the industrial park, and nobody's interested. Maybe you should put the sports complex in the industrial park. Well, we wouldn't consider doing that at all today. So given how much the value of property has gone up and the fact that back when this was done, we had the ability to annex. We don't have the ability to do that anymore. For me, this may be one that maybe we just hold off on. I'm not sure if the same demands are in place, and maybe it's one that we let our new executive director do an evaluation of whether that's really a good use of projects and funds and staff time.
You mean the sports complex?
The sports
So-
complex.
Because the last time we had the meeting, the discussion was that was in the hands of Park and Recreation to lead.
They're doing a
And-
parks master plan. This is not, this is.
Understood, but the last meeting we had, it was mentioned that sports complex study was to be led.
I don't recall that the Parks and Recreation were going to take the lead in that study. I don't.
So the sports complex was combined in the RFP that was issued, and so it is included in what we just did an RFP, and they're choosing a consultant to move forward with that.
200,000 was grant funded?
Mm-hmm. 250.
So,
Yeah.
So let's
Understood, but I
wasn't-
just wanted to make sure we didn't have overlap on this one as well.
And I
So-
just wanted to say that because so we've committed to moving forward with that, with the assumption that EDC is committed to putting that 50,000 in for that piece of the RFP.
Okay.
And spending would be next year, no spending this year. Okay, good. What, excuse me?
RFP, so we're selecting the consultant right now.
We've done an RFP, but we haven't selected a consultant.
Right.
And,
So it
and
could
that
be
was
like-
put together to try to make it cheaper and get a better bang for the buck. But we can still say, we're out, tag
Yeah.
we're out, and you can do a deduct out of the contract.
Right.
Or we can do it. I just think that the environment that we were in when this was originally presented by
Was
Garner
different.
and where we are now
It's
is
in the
very
budget.
different.
Yeah, yeah.
It's already in the budget. But it was moved from
But
this
every
year.
dollar is super important, I'm just saying.
It's going
should-
from this year to next year is what we said, we're rolling it over. So it's in the budget this year.
And it can be
and-
taken out of the budget as
No,
well.
no, we already agreed to that.
Well, I
The
thought we were
sports-
having a budget discussion and everything's open for conversation.
That was in the prior list that we had gone over, which was the
Sure.
257,000, which included,
I understand that. I'm just
those-
saying we can go back to the beginning of the meeting, and
If
now
we-
that we've talked about all of these other things, and we're super concerned about cash flow, is that the best way to spend $50,000?
Okay, so maybe what we do,
understood. We'll finish off what we got here.
thank you,
Okay,
yes.
So, the Emile Multicultural and Recreational Complex Infrastructure Study for $100,000. Do we support that?
Yes.
Okay. And then the last one of the projects was the Transportation Master Plan. $200,000. Again, summary legal was, master plans of these are normally proportionally split, not 100% on the BEDC, and done every 5 years according to Trey, and it's been 5 years since the last one was done.
Can you clarify, Mr. Attorney, because you were talking a lot about comprehensive plans, and this isn't the comprehensive plan.
So the transportation master plan is an element of a comprehensive plan.
Right.
Just like your utilities and water.
Correct.
It's not just what the future land use is. Future land use is what gets all the attention. That's just one element of it. So, you know, just in my experience, what EDCs, how they participate, whether it's in the planning function or the funding function, is they look to the areas that will be unlocked by the investment, whether it's for the future roads or whatever the case may be. So while there's participation, it's limited by the scope of their mission.
Can I ask one question, just because I'm going to have to write this out here in a little bit? And that is, how we would proportionally split that? Would it be considered based off of traffic flow that's commercial into the city? Or
Right, so.
would that work?
That's the policy side of it. I mean, as far as the legalities of it, yes, I personally have had EDCs participate in these planning functions. But when they have, all I'm saying is that it's been proportional in nature, depending on those factors. Yeah, so.
I think we have an opportunity with maybe retail coach to provide some of that information that we may already have.
Yeah, actually, yeah.
Could be
and
80,
Retail
90%.
Coach, we've worked
Yes.
with them in another community, so.
Yeah, I think they could tell us really quickly if 80 or 90% of the traffic is people coming to work or if it's people that are actually shopping. And then I'll understand how to split that up.
Retail coach seems like a good source. Is everybody okay with that for some logic to, but you want to know what to put in?
Thank you. So,
You want to,
Can I suggest that we ask the retail coach to give us a percentage, and that's the percentage we use? Because we don't have to know that
He wants a
percentage
number to
tonight.
plug in.
I'm
Yeah, right.
I'm good.
Putting a placeholder right now of $200,000, that's what this is.
That's the total ask. And so whether we do,
well, the majority of when you look at the master transportation plan, you're not redoing Pecan and Chestnut. It's out and it's new roads. So it's probably going to be, I would think, in a 75 or higher kind of number anyway. But we can do, you're just wanting a number to plug in. We can do 100 and have retail coach
let's
confirm
do
that.
100, and then get an answer back from retail coach, and then I can adjust it before. Kevin, good? Mayor, good? Jeff, good? Okay. So we'll go 100. All right. So now, that's it on the list of the CIP part. Is there any wish to go back sorry, let me go back and summarize now. What we had in there, 4 million, the two major projects that we had in there was $4 million, which was the start of the build-out of the BIP, It had $1 million for the MoCA extension, and it had $2 million for MLK and technology MLK connection. So that was in this original plan. What we're adding in now is $1 million for Blakey, $1 million for South Street, and then when you sum up the rest of this, it's going to be less than $1 million, probably $600,000-700,000 between the intersection, the Emile neighborhood, and the transportation. That's going to be $3.5 million. So essentially, we'll go up $2.5 million for next year's budget.
315,000, right? Because Agnes is already in.
So yeah, it's 100, 200, and 100 for Emile, 230 for the intersection, and then 100 for transportation.
You're right, I
So
had
230,
115.
330, 430, figuring that we're going to be maybe a little bit higher than that on the other, so it's $500,000, and then $1 million for Blakey and $1 million for South Street. So that'll move us up $2.5 million for next year, which we have enough cash in investments to be able to draw from. We can then take a look at what these come out with after the engineering studies of whether we need to finance beyond that. So I don't think that from a budget point of view, we would be presenting a budget that requires bond funding for next year. Okay. So, all right. The key part that we have at this point is I thank you all for helping get this done. I want to remind everybody that we have approved nothing. There's no project that we have implied approval on. Every project, every study needs to be presented as a project. From that project point of view, we would then have that presented to the BEDC board for approval moving forward, okay?
So we're saying leave it's worth the 50,000 for the sports complex to just see what they come up with?
Actually, I would like to have a little bit more discussion on that, if you don't mind.
No problem.
If everybody's okay with some time here, okay? I agree that the time that we talked about that a couple of years ago, I mean, that was different than what we're faced with today. And it is very true with the price of land that has gone just skyrocketing around here. The ability to have it in city limits is probably almost non-existent, right? I mean, it would have to be outside the city limits. It would have to be.
I think that they were talking about 50 to 60 acres kind of thing.
Yeah, and we just don't have 50 or 60 acres around here.
Maybe we can do a pickleball complex.
Yeah. Well, the point is that we have the ability to take that out of the budget right now, right? We have the ability to take it out of the budget, and the idea is a good idea. I've lived in places that have these things, and they bring in a whole ton of money, but they're in the city limits, or at least maybe a couple of miles outside of it, and it makes a lot of sense. But what we have, how we're structured, what the cost is, I would be okay with like pulling that thing out and going no, because we've got so many other things coming up that I just don't think it really makes sense right now for us to put in 50,000 for it. Just my take. I like to hear other people's opinion.
I agree. If it's going to have to be far away, which it would seem definitely does, because I would have envisioned it could place being somewhere within a mile of 71 in the downtown area, so they're close to hotels, restaurants, and what have you, as opposed to, I don't know where. So maybe we should take it out now.
Yeah, my only concern with taking it out would be if we have committed to do it, and if somebody went forward and signed a contract with the understanding that we were going to participate, I wouldn't want to go back on our word when it comes to, something like that. I don't know where they are in the process, so, or, how changeable things are at this point, or how modular their study might be to just take out that part. So I would want to do what we said we were going to do if we can, to the extent that we're not going to hurt anybody.
Can I just make one?
I've got a question. Is there any reason we could not partner with the county to develop this? And here's why I asked that question. Pflugerville, their sports complex is quite substantial, and it's not in the city, I don't believe. But it's close enough to retail establishments and everything else. You actually have to go into Pflugerville to stay, eat, and so forth and so on. They made some mistakes because there is no eating facility right there. My daughter was a soccer person, so I spent most of my 10 years as a soccer mom. So if we could partner up with the county, there is tracts of land and corridors that would make it appealing, especially with the road system in this area.
The county owns tracts of land.
But I think either way, we committed already this year. It's taken a while for the process to execute. They're at the point of execution, and I think when we look at $50,000, they've already put the RFQs out with this in it in order to get a consolidated study. I think for $50,000, based on all of the traction we had earlier in the year about this, I think it's worth pursuing it. I think the other part too is from a development point of view, as we grow and grow and grow, the needs for, I think, recreational activities or enhanced outdoor activities, I think we need to kind of get our foot on the concept and then get on the land, or what'll happen is we'll develop ourselves out of the business of having rec facilities. Just my opinion, kind of supporting Kevin.
No, I mean, both of you bring up the same point, that we're already kind of started baking the bread here, so we need to find out where we are in it. I guess that's probably a better route to go, is to find out where we are on that thing, and if it's already committed, like you said, then yeah, yes, that makes sense.
And then it gets put into the same pot of all the other studies that generate multi-million-dollar projects. If we don't study it, nothing will be in there, and it'll only be intersections, is what my fear is, that we'll only be developing intersections for the rest of the next few years. So.
Any other discussion on any other projects or any other things that we have in previous budgets? Okay, then let's have a motion to
Move to adjourn.
Do I hear a second on that?
Kevin's favorite motion.
All right, all in favor? Okay, adjourn.